Thank you.
Oh, gravy.
No, please.
I thought you liked gravy.
Yeah, I do, but look at it.
I'm sorry. Is it too much?
No. No, it's fine. It's lovely. Thank you.
Oh, come on, eat up. I said it! What's wrong? Eh? You're not hungry. Is that it? Don't you want it?
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, back with another video. So yeah, let's talk about women's boxing, because whether we like it or not, regardless of self-interest in the boxing establishment, women's boxing isn't going anywhere. Some of you guys might remember that a few years back, I made a video where I highlighted the pretty obvious issues with the whole concept of women's boxing. First of all, there's really no market for it whatsoever. I mean, I've been around boxing for my entire adult life. I know many fighters and many fans of the sport, both casual and hardcore. And I've watched boxing with many people of all sorts of contingents. And one thing I've never come across in all my years of watching boxing, and I mean never, not even one time, is a fan of women's boxing. Not even once. As any boxing fan will tell you, any honest boxing fan anyway, when you watch boxing with a group of casuals, women fights basically serve as an excuse to go and take a piss, or make a cup of tea or something like that, or maybe update your social medias and stuff. Also, one of the more serious, glaring problems with women's boxing, and it's something that the mainstream media, as well as a lot of the casuals, are pretty much too scared or too whipped into shape to even talk about, is the fact that there's a serious lack of quality and competition. I mean, there's 4 or 5 women fighters in the world who are even worth talking about and have any ability whatsoever, who have the right kind of backing, pumped full of PEDs and who knows what else, and have the kind of motivation and aggressive personality that very few women in the world have naturally. So, when you see these events that include women's boxing, what you often get is one of these brand name women fighters versus some unknown, unheard of, emotionally unstable broke chick from some third world country, usually with a fake boxing record, which is a lot easier to do, by the way, than you might think. A lot of them are homeless junkies or former strippers, and a lot of them are deeply damaged and mentally ill. So you get one roided up chick who has trained all her life versus some absolute no-hoper, and what you end up with is an absolute gang initiation style massacre, and it genuinely puts people off. Every time I've watched a fight card with friends or family, as soon as one of these women fights comes on, it seems to genuinely make everybody who watches it uncomfortable, and they can't really stand to watch it for very long, which is why very rarely do these women fights ever get talked about by anybody but boxing promoters or shill journalists in the boxing media. So in short, there's really no market to speak of in regards to women's boxing. Fans are simply not interested. These fights don't make any money, they don't generate any kind of buzz, and their inclusion into the sport is obviously forced. Despite this though, over the past 5 years or so, almost every major fight card you see has to have some random woman fight shoehorned in there as either a floater or in most cases the actual co-main event. I mean, I remember a while back, I think, was it Matchroom? Matchroom had the nerve to put Katie Taylor over Dimitri Bivol on the bill. I mean, that's insane, man. I mean, it's honestly quite disrespectful, if truth be told. You see, rather than setting up an event for these women fights and seeing how well they do organically, boxing promoters were basically trying to trick people into watching them by shoehorning them into these big cards. It's been going on for years, actually. Don King used to do it back in the day with Mike Tyson undercards, with that bum Chrissy Martin, who was an absolute fraud, who spent most of her career fighting fixed fights against chicks with fake records, chicks who had literally never boxed before, and had about a week and a half of training, and a fake boxing record that they literally just pulled out of nowhere, out of obscurity, and the fights were a complete joke. So this whole gimmick we're seeing in the sport right now is nothing new, and it never made any serious amounts of money, but it was there for quite a while. And since there isn't a market for these fights, you would assume, if you didn't know any better, that eventually the boxing establishment would realise this and give up on the whole gimmick. Here's the thing though, obviously if we know this, then the powerful and well-connected boxing promoters in the sport, such as Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, Bob Arum and whatnot, obviously they know this. So it makes you wonder, what exactly is the agenda here? Because clearly generating money has nothing to do with it. Otherwise we wouldn't see the likes of Katie Taylor and Clarence Shields getting so much hype, promotion and mainstream media coverage. So what is it and what's going on? And why is it that despite the absolute failure to organically make women's boxing mainstream, do these boxing promoters keep insisting on pushing it? Well, as far as I'm concerned, it has nothing to do with business and more to do with general social engineering. It's no secret that feminism was for a long time a hot topic in pretty much all aspects of entertainment. The mainstream media and the entertainment industry basically did everything they could to destroy relations between men and women. They demonized traditional gender roles, marriage and homogeneous families, and demoralized the masses in that regard. They made women and men practically hate each other and be in this constant state of conflict rather than working to support one another. For a man, getting married, being a strong and charismatic leader in your household and providing for your family, protecting them from any kind of corrupting influence, is wrong and misogynistic. And for a woman, being a good mother, a good wife and taking care of your family, providing nurture and stability, is degrading and weak, and no, you should be the one at work all day depressed and miserable. It's no surprise that with this kind of social engineering going on in the world, the media would take a sport like boxing, which is a very old, very noble and very traditional and very masculine sport, and try to make it some kind of beacon for degeneracy. Women, for the most part, in my experience, aren't really interested in sport, and those that are tend to be into it, you know, based on some kind of emotional or traumatic issue, like they really wanted to please a parent or something like that. Let's be honest, guys, very rarely, if ever, will you come across a woman who actually has any kind of interest in taking up sports. With combat sports being particularly masculine, I mean, is there anything that a woman could partake in that is more likely to lead to infertility and some kind of long-time trauma than combat sports? It makes me wonder if it's part of the whole depopulation agenda, generally making women less fertile and less likely to reproduce, with men getting more and more accustomed to, rather than protecting and providing for women, getting off to watching them beat each other's brains in. You might have noticed recently too that the boxing promoters who push women's boxing so hard have been doing everything they can to try to sexualize it. You see comments from all these bot accounts, all these desperate simps, saying the most disgusting, degenerate things about these women fighters, and the promoters as well as the fighters themselves seem to be lapping it up for the most part. You had that ugly old tramp Ebony Bridges, who is pushing 40 and looks like a sleazy old hooker who has never had a meaningful fight in her life, not a single one, just beating up useless journeyman girls who don't even know how to throw a proper punch or how to defend themselves. Yet the boxing establishment keeps pushing her as some kind of sex symbol, despite her being utterly repulsive as far as I'm concerned. You have Clarence Shields, who looks like Charles Martin in a bra, getting defended online by hordes of simps, while she acts like a total scumbag, making threats to people, chimping out, and playing the victim when anybody responds to her. I mean, where exactly are all these simps coming from? It makes me wonder if the algorithms on the internet are deliberately trying to create a particular kind of discourse in regards to women's boxing, because most of these interactions you see between these women fighters and all these bots and whatnot, they make me very suspicious because they come across as just completely unreal. But I digress. It actually reminds me of how Andre Ward and Guillermo Rigondeaux had practically no fans back in the day, and all their fights were bombs. Yet despite that, when you say anything even remotely critical about them, you'd have hordes of fanboys on the internet man-defending them till the end. They love them so much, but they don't love them enough to actually pay to see their fights and sit down and watch them. But back to the topic at hand. Why are they promoting women's boxing so hard? Why are they pushing it? Fightfilm made a video earlier where he was basically insinuating that this whole women's boxing gimmick is basically part of the whole trans agenda. They basically want to subliminally normalize women taking over the roles of men, becoming more and more masculine and more aggressive, with men taking over the roles of women, becoming more and more weak and more submissive. With the sport being sexualized too, that'll probably have a similar effect that you see with pornography, where basically people who watch it and get a lot of messages from it, they seem to develop kind of an unnatural and unrealistic view of sexuality in general, which of course leads to all kinds of sexual degeneracy, as well as a general drop in testosterone levels in men, which makes society weaker and easier to control. You have women with six-packs and big bulging muscles beating the crap out of smaller, weaker women, and doing so in a way that's particularly brutal, since women naturally don't punch as hard, so they take more damage in the long run. They're talking about boosting women world title fights up to 12 rounds rather than 10, and even lengthening the rounds to 3 minutes rather than 2, further making the sport more like men's boxing and lessening the distinction between the two. You got them trash talking each other in scripted arguments that just sound so off-putting and unnatural, trying to copy the most boring and degenerate aspects of men's boxing. To be honest guys, the more I think about it, the more disturbing and degenerate women's boxing seems, and the more I realise that it's never going to stop, regardless of how little money it makes and how little interest it generates. The very fact it exists is yet another example of what I've been talking about when I mentioned cancel culture. They're literally infesting and bastardizing and cancelling parts of our culture with cultural Marxist propaganda like this. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about women's boxing. I would say that you guys should either boycott it or simply refuse to buy any card that has a woman fight on it. But if truth be told, it likely won't make a difference, because women's boxing is clearly part of a bigger agenda. And like these social engineering, groomer movies that you see in Hollywood that don't make any money and practically bankrupt any studio involved with the making of them, it doesn't matter, because there's likely a lot of money laundering involved, and the people who are backing these agendas are clearly not interested in just purely making money. They clearly have some sort of system in place where they get compensated no matter what, and no matter how much money they generate. Where do you guys think all this money's coming from? How are they able to pay the likes of Clarence Shields so much money with no return? Who knows, probably money laundering. So what do you guys think? Am I reading into it a bit too much? Or is there something seriously sinister going on with the vast promotion of women's boxing? Let me know what you guys think. Stay tuned for more content. Thanks for watching. And yeah, God bless guys.